to. First of all, the question of a joint resolution. And I'd like your direct recommendation. Do you believe this should be a document that the President ultimately has to sign, or should we keep with the current practice that it's a congressional document? Dr. Fisher?
Yeah, I think the risk of a joint budget resolution are too great. I think you would lose your independence. I'm very much on separation of powers and checks and balances and the representative government. I think we've seen, particularly since World War II, huge increase in presidential power, many reasons for that. And with that increase in power in the presidency, to me, have come colossal mistakes by executive, not just overreaching, but incompetence. So I don't want to see Congress weakened in any way. And
the Presidents, by the way, would like to meet with you right after the hearing.
I know. I've got a dinner engagement at the White House tonight.
Okay.
I think it's very odd, the attitude. People are very realistic about Congress, generally critical. I think maybe we idealize the Supreme Court too much, but we vastly idealize the presidency. The President is someone with a national interest in mind, surrounded by very competent advisors. So what... it's just a complete separation between the President as it is and the way the President... And if the President is this strong, he should be sending up a responsible budget. No one holds the President accountable.
Dr. Joyce.
I do not think you should change the budget process to make it a joint resolution. And I think, as I suggested in my testimony, that it would only help at the margin during those cases when the Congress and the President already are inclined to agree, and it would make things worse in cases where they're not inclined to agree.
Dr. Posner.
I agree with Phil and Lou on that. Absolutely.
Okay. Let me go to the second question just quickly. The second part of this hearing is a question of how do we provide incentives for Congress to actually take up a budget resolution. One of the ideas I mentioned in my opening was strengthening the right of senators to proceed to and debate a budget resolution if the Budget Committee or the Senate fails to act. What is your reaction to trying to strengthen the right of a senator to proceed, the right of senators to proceed to a budget if the Budget Committee fails to act? Dr. Fisher?
I think you have to protect your, as Ron said, the key parts, appropriation bills and other things that have to go on. And if the budget resolution is not ready, I think the other parts of Congress have to proceed.
Okay. Dr. Joyce?
I think anything that you can do to create incentives to have a budget resolution adopted is worth doing, and I think that it would put pressure on the budget committees if the budget committees didn't feel like they had complete control of whether there is a budget resolution or not, but thought that other senators might actually, in a sense, take over their role. That, to me, would create greater incentives for the Budget Committee to want to complete its work, and it strikes me, while I haven't thought about it a lot, as a good idea.
Dr. Posner?
Yeah, I think it could have the same effect that a discharge petition has, say, in the House, where the threat of losing jurisdiction and control can really focus the mind of the committees and maybe produce more action than you otherwise would.
Okay. Let me go to the second major proposal, which is to create a 60-vote point of order against appropriations or perhaps revenue bills or perhaps all legislation until a budget resolution is enacted. Dr. Fisher, you kind of already answered that. You don't particularly like that idea, I take from your previous answer.
That's correct.
Dr. Joyce?
I'm more sympathetic to the idea, and again, I think that if we're going to say that the budget resolution is where the budget policy for the Congress is being made, then the idea that you can sort of proceed to do things that involve taxing people and spending money outside of the context of that budget resolution without making it difficult for people to do that strikes me as not a good idea. And so it's not just in the Senate where you could have a 60-vote point of order, but in the House, I believe it's true that if a budget resolution hasn't been adopted by May 15th, then appropriation bills can be considered in the House. So I think you would want to look at both of those things. You know, you're thinking about the Senate quite reasonably, but I think there's also a House part of this.
Yep. Dr. Posner.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in principle, you know, the whole point of the Budget Act is to set the plan in motion first and then have the individual actions follow, and the extent to which there's leakage is a problem. I think there's some real implementation questions. For example, would that 60-vote point of order hold against a CR? And if it not, as opposed to just appropriations, and if it does, then you really escalate the potential for a possible shutdown. Do you, in fact, through the back door, in effect, create a 60-vote requirement for appropriations bills through this process by enabling members to hold up an appropriation absent the 60 vote? And I think the other question is, sometimes these points of order are effective in achieving their goals, and sometimes they just raise the price of an agreement. And you know, given the necessity of passing appropriations, whether the need to gain the support of those other votes, whether that would increase spending, kind of counterintuitively, or other actions remains to be seen. But I think in principle it's a good idea to have some kind of sanction, if shame or other kinds of things don't work. But on the other hand, there are some unintended consequences we have to pay attention to.
You know, the thing I've been struggling with is I've been on this committee 25 years. I've been chairman. I've been ranking member. You know, the hard reality is, if you're in leadership, it's not all that attractive to take up a budget resolution and go through vote-a-rama. I mean, I just tell you, our colleagues do not look forward to the prospect of going through vote-a-rama. It has become an object of derision. I mean, that's the fact of the matter. And, you know, you've got other committee chairmen who've never particularly liked the existence of the Budget Committee. Let's also be frank about that. I mean, if you're an appropriator, the Budget Committee is not a real attractive inconvenience. And if you're the Finance Committee, you know, same thing. You're not very eager to have the Budget Committee telling you what your limits are. I mean, and I'll tell you, they all can go to leadership. So I'm convinced unless we provide some additional incentive or disincentive around a budget resolution, I mean, we can see what's happening. You go back to 2000, only one time have we done a budget in an election year. I was chairman of the committee then. I remember how hard it was. And the way I persuaded the leadership to do it,
presidential election year.
In a presidential election year, the way I persuaded them to do it was to tell them, if we don't, any member can go to the floor with a budget resolution. That was the thing that convinced them to go ahead. So that's the thing that I think we should seriously think about strengthening.